Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the first session of Enlightenment Reloaded with instructor and Professor Reza Negarestani. I'll read the seminar description and Reza's description, and then we can start. Um, this module, in line with the past Centre Seminar Cartesian Conflagrations, examines Descartes and, in addition, Spinoza, the heretic Jewish prince of philosophy, as the revolutionary progenitors of a radical enlightenment. In doing so, the seminar challenges fatigued interpretations with which the project of enlightenment in its Cartesian lineage is often associated with mind-body dualism and rigid rationalism, among others. We will explore how Descartes' mature philosophy initiated a stark philosophical movement that posed the greatest challenge to Aristotelian scholasticism, where philosophy had become subordinate to a branch of sciences with inbuilt blind spots with regard to where they have come from and where they are headed. The seminar traces Descartes' schema for rational and computational mechanics back to the systematization of perennial philosophical ideas from Plato, dialectica to Euclid geometric codification of it, and subsequently al-Khwarizmi, al-Khwarizmi's algorithmic take on the later where Thus Spake the Algorithm, by which the first Latin translation of al-Khwarizmi begins, is more akin to a profound distillation of philosophy, revolutionary ideas than an AI-informed ratification of a legacy of the Enlightenment that has been observed and now is being taken for granted. To this end, central to our investigation are the methods and ethics put forward by Descartes and Spinoza as armamentarians of an authentic enlightenment by all means, an emancipatory and revolutionary labor in its inception that has been hijacked by a surviving scholastic counter-revolutionary force that was never fully quashed. This counter-revolutionary force, as we shall investigate, has moved through the likes of Thomas Hobbes, religious addendums to Immanuel Kant, at which point the project of enlightenment simplifies itself, settled, and rested upon mere conciliatory epistemological or knowledge acquisition problems, riddled with an ad hoc and arbitrary political and religious addendums, whose major purpose is to whitewash over the false-hearted spirit of disappropriated enlightenment we have inherited. Reza Negarestani is a philosopher. He has contributed extensively to journals and anthologies and lectured at numerous international universities and institutes. His current philosophical project is focused on rationalist universalism, beginning with the evolution of the modern system of knowledge and advancing toward contemporary philosophies of rationalism, their procedures as well as their demands for special forms of human conduct. He is the author of Cyclopedia and Intelligence and Spirit. Reza, you can take away and start.
Thank you so much, Ether. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. One thing, Ether, any person who is attendee, you can let them in if they want to. It's fine with me. As they come, those people who are simply auditing, you can let them into the room. So basically, this seminar is based on a talk that I gave in Delft uh, during the bombing runs of Beirut. And I remember that this was Ray Brazier was supposed to be there. I intentionally wrote this, as a kind of, uh, opening up a discussion with him. And of course, Katarina Tetelnawais. But of course, Ray could not come, given the situation in Beirut. So I gave this, it was like 25 minutes long, almost 3,000, less than 3,000 words. So this is a kind of an extensive expansion of that talk. And the talk, if I remember correctly, it was Thus Spake the Algorithm. Because you see, the first Latin compendium of al-Jabr wal-Muqabala is starts with this line: "Thus spake algorithmi," which is al-Khwarizmi, Latinized version. So, uh, as it was in the abstract of the seminar, we are primarily trying to focus on certain sort of things, processes, historical, philosophical, that have happened in the genealogy and development of the Enlightenment project, and why Enlightenment mostly has somehow from within itself crushed by a counter-revolutionary core, some sort of a coup d'etat. Uh, the first session, which is this session, I'm mostly going to give a certain sort of introduction, and mostly I will be talking about the legacy of Descartes. Next session, we will go to Spinoza. And then from that point onward, session 3 and 4, we move toward certain sort of, highly contemporary issues around the idea of the Enlightenment. And the fourth session, I want to construct all of these stuff that I have been talking about, particularly with regard to the concerns about AI and computation, bring it back into this sort of revived enlightenment, into a revolutionary fold. And I'm not going to spoil this story, but nevertheless, it is going to be a prequel to uh, my next seminar, which is called Technologius Autodidactus, uh, as a reference to Alexander Bogdanov's Technology, and also Ibn Nafis and Ibn Tufayil's books, Philosophus and Theologius Autodidactus, about a certain sort of revolutionary intelligence that we need at this point, and with what sort of problems this revolutionary intelligence is now, confronted with. So I'm going to read this. I'm not going to finish this. I wrote this for this session. It's around 7,000 words. I think that we can do it since we have 2.5 hours. It would be great if we keep all the questions after I finish reading this, right? And then we can, open the gates and, let everyone ask questions and heckle this and that. Uh, Sorry, I forgot to get my pack of cigarettes. Let me just go get my pack of cigarettes and start reading. Okay. So this is session one. Its title is Descartes Underground. I know that I gave some, reading materials for you, but I have added, I'm going to, make references to some materials which I haven't shared, and I can actually um, put them in the Google Drive for you. But these are just like, um, kind of supplementary materials. So, um, first, we have to start with the wrong Enlightenment and the older one. Let's begin with a provocation, as always we do in these seminars. The Enlightenment didn't fail because reason became too ambitious. It failed, or rather, it was repeatedly disfigured because reason was not permitted to become ambitious enough. The irreputable or malignant Enlightenment, the Enlightenment of administration, imperial bookkeeping, racial hierarchy, gender disparity, colonial pedagogy, scientific self-congratulation, liberal police metaphysics, and technical mastery without the possibility of emancipation is not the truth of enlightenment at all. It's one of its captures. It's a counterfeit that survived by wearing the face of what it had neutralized. The counterfeit enlightenment is reason after the police have edited the minutes. So the task of this seminar is not really to defend enlightenment in the usual exhausted way. I am not going to defend it as a self-image of Europe, a secular maturity, as a victory of science over religion, as a heroic tale of brave men escaping superstition by means of measurement, experiment, and good manners. That story, unfortunately, is rather too shallow, even when it's not actively obscene. Nor I will join the opposite chorus that says enlightenment is nothing but domination, abstraction, whiteness, disenchantment, calculation, and the murder of worlds, indigenous or not. That story gives, unfortunately, the enemy too much credit. It mistakes the hijacking for the project and then congratulates itself for having exposed what the hijacker wanted to see to begin with. What I want to call enlightenment and what I want us to recover over these 4 sessions is something rather older, a stranger, and particularly more dangerous. The labor of reason as a reconstruction of the conditions under which thought can free itself from inherited images of authority and essentialism. Enlightenment in this sense does not refer to a period, or a style, or a secular etiquette, and definitely not a doctrine of scientific progress. It is, by all accounts, a procedure, but not a formula. It's an armamentarium, a philosophical armamentarium, but not a machine that works by itself. It is a discipline by which the mind learns to break the grip of what appears self-evident, natural, sacred, empirical, ancestral, or politically inevitable. This is why the opening word is not progress, but reduction. Not reduction in impoverished sense of flattening everything into physics, biology, economics, data or mechanism, reduction in the older sense that we are going to talk about as a core principle of the Enlightenment project, particularly one of its main core principles. This is a questioning back in Rückfrage, Searle's idea of questioning back, to the foundations. And of course, that is the whole point of Descartes' meditations, A questioning back, a stripping of images from the authority they have now acquired. A return from the noisy prestige of the given to the elementary operations by which something becomes initially thinkable, right? Reduction is the art of forcing an image to disclose the conditions under which it became sovereign. It is the first act of sabotage against any form of false immediacy, right? Next section. Sorry for the noise in the background. Our neighbor is doing some repair. Genealogical interruption against the provincial ownership of reason. Before fully moving to Descartes, however, we have to interrupt the familiar genealogy at stake here. There is a peculiar cognitive dissonance in much contemporary Western discussion of enlightenment. In one mood, Europe congratulates itself. Enlightenment is our gift to humanity. In another mood, often only a few minutes later, it denounces itself. Enlightenment is bad because it's Western. Right? The second sentence pretends to be critique, but it keeps the grammar of the first sentence. It still grants Europe the copyright over reason, method, universality, critique, and of course, emancipation. And at this point, it merely changes the effect from pride to guilt. But guilt, as we know it, is often vanity after the costume change. This is why the slogan that enlightenment is the Western project must be handled with absolute suspicion. If the phrase denotes particular 18th century European formation with its institution, pamphlet wars, salons, academies, clandestine books, censorship battles, and political consequences, then it is descriptively useful. But if it means that the conditions of enlightenment, the techniques of reason, and the project of rational emancipation are civilizational property, then it's not critique, but rather a fraudulent invoice. It gives too much credit to Western civilization from the get-go. Worse, it actually repeats colonial accounting in negative form, such that Europe remains the owner, source, center, culprit, and measure of everything, even when it stands accused before the rest of the world. We cannot give Europe such dignity of being both the inventor and the culprit at the same time. Sorry, this is not going to happen on our humble watch. Therefore, a more serious genealogy must be less provincial and probably more destructive in its true ethos. The project that later erupts in European Enlightenment is not born from a sealed Western interior at all. Is prepared by translations, appropriations, distortions, inventions, and recompositions across Greek, Syriac, Arabic, Persian, Hebrew, among other worlds. The point is not here to replace a European trophy case with an Islamic or Persianate one. That would merely reverse the vanity. The point, however, is that the reason has no native soil and it will never enjoy such a homeland or himat. Its history is a chain of displacements, exiles, commentaries, technical mediations, migrations, and conceptual thefts that sometimes become universal precisely because they survive the collapse of their first homes. A civilization that mistakes its relay stations for birthplaces has already turned history into customs control. So in this case, al-Khwarizmi, who is credited, for the invention of algebra, is not by any means an exotic Middle Eastern precursor in this story. He is one of the names at the point where number, procedure, and rational operation become historically irreversible. From his name, Latinized through the medieval transmission of arithmetical texts, we inherit the line that leads to algorithm or algorithm. From al-Jabr wal-Muqabala, completion and balancing. We inherit not the word algebra, but a style of rational operation which states restore what has been broken, move terms across a relation, cancel false asymmetries, bring the hidden structure of the problem into the foreground. If it is not already a philosophical image of enlightenment, then the word enlightenment has been made much too small. The same is true of optics, vision, and natural light. Long before Descartes turns the rainbow into a theater of method and beauty of cosmos. Ibn al-Haytham, al-Hazan, Latinized al-Hazan, Ibn Haytham, works on vision and light had already transformed the problem of seeing into a disciplined inquiry into conditions, media, geometry, experiment, and of course, error. The question is no longer what appears, but how appearance is produced, through which apparatus, under which constraints, and with what possibility of deception, right? That's why the genealogy of enlightenment cannot be separated from the genealogy of optics. Insofar as the critique of enlightenment is actually an optical critique to begin with, in its very backbone, because we are talking about images of power, right? And deceptions and distortions that go with them, and how they are being transmitted, proliferated, so on and so forth. To see is never merely to receive an image. To see is to enter a contest over the conditions under which images acquire authority. So, seen from this perspective, the anti-enlightenment gesture that says we must abandon enlightenment because it's Western is not radical enough. It abandons enlightenment at the very exact moment it should be wrested away from Western self-ownership. Precisely because it mistakes a hijacked inheritance for the whole of the inheritance. And as such, the task is not anymore to purify enlightenments of its Arab, Muslim, Jewish, Persianate, African, or Mediterranean meditations in order to make it properly, purely European, nor to condemn it for the same fantasy of purity, but rather the task at hand is to reconstruct the older relay of reason in which method, mathematics, optics, metaphysics, and emancipation were never the possessions of a people, but the dangerous effects of certain planetary transmissions. So when we begin with Descartes here, we don't begin with Europe beginning from itself. We begin with a late and explosive reconfiguration of a much longer sequence. Descartes, I would say, matters for us because he takes this scattered inheritance of dialectic, geometry, algebra, method, and natural light and turns it into a problem of the subject capable of science, but also doubt, but also a radical new philosophy. But of course, he's not the owner of that inheritance. He's one of its incendiary relay points. The West didn't invent the light, it built some powerful lamps, named itself custodian of the sun, and then charged the rest of the world admission to daylight in our story. To reload the Enlightenment today is also to destroy the bad provincial myth that reason belongs either to Western pride or Western guilt. Reason belongs to no civilization at all, precisely because it is alien through and through. It belongs only to the labor required to make its claims intelligible, answerable, transmissible, and ultimately emancipatory. This is why we are going to begin the first session with Descartes. Not because Descartes is a sovereign founder of modern philosophy in the textbook sense. That paternity myth is of no interest for us. We begin with Descartes because his philosophy marks the point, the exact point, at which an older philosophical program is reloaded under modern conditions, reframing the problem anew, right? Plato's struggle against the tyranny of images, Euclid's organization of proof and judgment, al-Khwarizmi's procedural art of restoration and balancing, and the early modern demand that science cease to be a scholastic monument and become a practice of self-discovery. Descartes does not invent reason. He doesn't invent method. He doesn't even invent the subject. What he does is more actually explosive in its true essence. He turns them into a discipline for deposing an inherited authority. So this is a book by Tarek Dika. I will definitely upload it. It's called, it's essentially Method in Descartes' work. So this is the formation of the subject of science, universality without uniformity. And this is the sort of enlightenment. One of the main problems with enlightenment has always been that, we have talked about a universalism that amounts to uniformization, right? Which, of course, we have seen the consequences of such, problems. So the most important correction to make at the beginning is actually this. Cartesian method, par excellence, is not just a little algorithm that can be mechanically applied to every problem in the same way. Yeah, we can actually extract political edict out of this. This is the mistake Dialectica calls the uniformity thesis. The assumption that if Descartes has one method, then the same procedure must be applied uniformly to metaphysics, mathematics, optics, morals, ethics, natural philosophy, and so on and so forth. That's actually not Descartes' method. That's just gerrymandering of Descartes' Cartesian method. It's a fundamentally flawed image of the method. So Descartes' decisive formulation is that Descartes' method is universal without being uniform. And it is universal in scope because it concerns the formation of the subject capable of science. But it's not uniform in application because different problems require different actualizations of the same acquired disposition. The method is not, in fact, an ordinary script. It's what usually is being called habitus, meaning a durable cognitive disposition acquired through practice by which the ingenuum, in Descartes' sense, becomes capable of solving problems. This is important for us politically and philosophically, you know, precisely because a revolutionary method that cannot vary with the problem is not, in fact, a revolutionary method. It's bureaucracy with some metaphysical, opaque, black box ambitions. A method that can change, it's a stride when the train changes, of course, is not reason. So we should therefore be careful whenever we speak of something like algorithm, program, or rational mechanics. These are useful terms for us only if we do not turn Descartes into this sort of, bad prophet of automatic procedures. Yeah. And algorithms into AI, this shitty AI that we have, which is still interesting, magnificent. I like it. The Cartesian method is not a button and not a dream of frictionless computation. It's closer to the formation of a trained intelligence, an intelligence that has learned how to move between intuition, deduction, enumeration, imagination, order, measure, and, in fact, the limits of knowledge, hypothetical or otherwise. If there is an algorithmic dimension here, it's not the algorithm as black box, nor the algorithm as technical oracle. It's the algorithm as disciplined sequence of acts whose conditions must be intelligible to the one who performs them, such that they can be transmitted, proliferated, recontextualized, and reinvented anew. by different sort of practices and by different locales. The algorithm becomes obscene only when reconstructible procedure is replaced by the priestly silence and silence of the interface. So this is why Descartes' rules for direction of mind, make sense for us in this seminar. Even though it remained unfinished and was not published in his lifetime, the rules belongs to the 1620s and circulated only in restricted manuscript from before its posthumous publication in Dutch translation in 1684 and in Latin in 1701. The Discourse on Method, by contrast, gives the public a compact, almost previously brief presentation of the method. If we read only the discourse, we risk thinking of method as a short list of rules that can be applied across the board, right? If we read the rules alongside it, especially through Dika, then we see that the method is an education of the mind. It's more practice than theory. It forms a subject capable of science, and this formation is not reducible to epistemological hygiene. This point also prevents a second mistake. That is, identifying Cartesian method with mathesis universalis. Dika actually is careful. Mathesis universalis is, or universal science, or universal mathesis, is crucial, but it's not simply identical with method as such. And it's not by any means an all-devouring science that swallows metaphysics, physics, morals, ethics, and politics into mere mathematics. Because mathesis universalis is a culture of order and measure in subtle ways, as a balance sheet between noise and order, such that I said when I said it balanced precisely because, every sort of, from a computational perspective, every sort of good things that we have, history, uh, long range emotions, beliefs, are essentially coming from this balance sheet between noise and order. And that's exactly what Descartes wants to achieve, to show that things of which we are made of and things which we can create always are neither noise or pure order, but a perfect balance, which of course has, at this point, we can actually give a computational measure of such things. A training in the kinds of relations that allow the mind to move with precision. It is a second degree formation within the broader Cartesian scientific habitus. For our purposes, in this first session, this is important precisely because we don't want to turn the Enlightenment into the imperialization of mathematics. We just want to understand mathematics as one of the disciplines through which thought learns how not to be governed by simple appearances. And you know what simple appearances are in Plato? These are called icons. certain sort of rudimentary sensory semblances, eidolon, more, aggressive semblances, eidolons, from which the word idol comes from. And the most dangerous form of images, which Plato called phantasmata, phantasms, precisely because they have a high dose of optical distortion. Like ideals that beckons you to wasteland, to the desert, like mirages in the desert, right? So this is mathematics give, at least from a Platonic perspective, mathematics gives a safeguard, safety rails or safety switches about dealing with these massive amount of flood of images that we are dealing with, right? But of course, precisely because Plato is extremely suspicious of images, he does not uh, give too much attention to the idea of imagination itself as a constructive faculty. It is only Aristotle in the Anima, actually, who gives imagination its proper, status as a faculty of the mind, without which mind would be unable to do this or that. Descartes, as I have said it in my Descartes seminar, is a tad Platonist and no Platonist, precisely because he's also anti-Aristotelian to a great degree. This also comes, I would say, but this is completely irrelevant to our talk, coming from that he is actually a radical, at the bottom, he's a radical Christian who wants to wrest Christianity from the clutches of administrative, authoritarian, bureaucratic, high scholasticism church or cathedral. So Descartes also is famously just hates imagination. But Descartes actually does not hate imagination because he's suspicious of images. He hates imagination because imagination has a cost, you know? Precisely because imagination has something to do with the body as opposed to the mind. His famous example of, when it would be absolutely laborious and nasty to imagine a 1,000-sided figure. Yeah, this is Descartes. Do you know why? Precisely because it's costly. Can any of you imagine exactly a 1,000-sided figure? No, you can't. But this is Platonism shows that, well, this is why that we have a concept for a 1,000-sided figure, and we can mathematically, with complete exactitude, do this job without even breaking a sweat, right? So the phrase subject of science should therefore be heard in a demanding way. It does not mean a subject who owns science, commands it from outside, or merely receives objective data. It means a subject formed by operations, a subject whose powers have been trained by the labor of a subtle order, attention, distinction, and problem analysis. The subject is not born, it is rather manufactured. And because it is produced or manufactured or constructed, to put it accurately, it can also be deformed, translated, transmitted, sinisterly captured, narrowed, parochialized, militarized, commercialized, or made even utterly servile. So you see, he understands that moving toward that sort of direction, what it means for the future subject. It can be captured. It can be surveilled. But also it can be transformed and deformed. So the Enlightenment question is therefore not simply what is actually knowledge. It's rather what kind of subject must be formed so that knowledge does not become another image in the cave, Platonic cave, as a shadow on the walls of the human cage. Now, next section, Plato, the cave as a first theory of image capture. And you know, when we are talking about image capture, we are talking also not only about the human subject, but also the image capture of enlightenment itself. So to understand why Descartes is decisive, we have to go a little bit backward. The Cartesian operation is unintelligible if we detach it from the older philosophical struggle over images. You know, Aristotle, Plato, and Neoplatonists, and then the underground movements in Oxford and Paris school against the European, what you might call to be rise of the high church of scholasticism. Plato gives us the decisive beginning because Plato, not just because Plato gives us a doctrine we should simply repeat, but actually, in a twisted sort of way, because he formalizes a problem in a way that has never stopped haunting philosophy, ever. In the divided line and the cave, you know, when you read Republic, so it's cave allegory and the divided line analogy. These two are completely, really entangled with one another. The allegory of the cave is about, kind of the visualization of the human condition or the human subject. The divided line is even more sinister. It's an analogy, a diagram, a very perfect, compact, compressed computational diagram about what actually is going on in the cave itself. In the divided line and the cave, Plato is not merely saying that the senses deceive us. That's a simple kind of like watered down version of this, which so many people always repeat. And it's, of course, utterly misleading. Plato is asking how different orders of appearances acquire authority over the soul. Right? And in that sense, the cave is not a primitive cinema or a theater, as so many people might think. It is, in fact, a precise political technology of cognition. The prisoners do not see simply see shadows, precisely because they inhabit an institution in which shadows have been stabilized as reality. Their bodies are fixed, affixed to chains, as he says. Their orientation is fixed. Their field of attention is fixed. Their social wall confirms the authority of what appears as a reality. The images are not simply false, actually, in this scenario. They are, in fact, organized. They are repeated, ranked, narrated, socially enforced. The cave is thus not the opposite of reason. It is the prehistory of every order that wants to control reason by controlling the image environment in which reason evolves. The cave, hence, is not darkness. It's a lighting design for complete obedience. The divided line, hence, gives us a more refined vocabulary for the ascent from image to intelligibility. It moves from images and shadows to sensible things, from sensible things to mathematical objects, and finally to dialectical intellection. And dialectical intellection is on a different sort of footing, which is the whole idea of the Enlightenment. Again, the crude version of these sort of accounts of the cave and the divided line say that Plato hates images and wants a pure realm of forms because of it. But the more plausible and a stronger version is that Plato is trying to distinguish types of appearance and types of cognition. Not all images have the same status. Enlightenment, illumination, is to shed light on images so we can determine their ranks. Not all images have the same status. And not all can be, the foundation of our praxis. And not all appearances deceive in the same way. Some are more sinister and some less. In fact, not all abstractions liberate. Mathematics might free thought from immediate sensibility, but it still depends on hypotheses and diagrams. Dialectic must go even further. Not by despising diagrams, but by asking after the principles that makes any diagram, any science, any order of intelligibility possible. So dialectics is essentially going back to the foundations. This is quite actually very, a little bit topsy-turvy, not in a philosophical sense, but in a mythological sense. You know that Christopher Nolan's Odyssey is coming. I hope that he doesn't screw this up. Most probably he will. This is the idea of the Odyssey's trip, the journey, the voyage. What is this voyage is? The voyage starts with catabasis. So he's on the surface, and then he descends into the underworld to understand the foundations, the conditions of possibility of what we do when we do things or we think things. And then he has to, by any sort of guile and metiz and cunning of history, has to come back to the surface, which is the anabasis. And only then the circle of humanity is being closed. And a new species will arrive, which is the Enlightenment subject. This is the first sense in which Enlightenment is not anti-mythological. It is anti-idolatrous in a very precise sense. It opposes the freezing of an image into unquestionable authority. A myth, a scientific model, a sovereign, a market, a statistical dashboard, a racial taxonomy, a naturalized gender hierarchy, a metaphysical picture of the human. All of these can become cave images or phantasmata when their conditions of production disappear behind their authority. The problem is not image as such, as Plato would say. The problem is image without critique, image without genealogy, an image without reduction, and ultimately image without the possibility of reconstruction. So this also allows us to avoid the lazy opposition between rationality and imagination. The cave allegory is an education of imagination by power. Philosophy doesn't abolish imagination. It retains it so that the image can become finally a dynamic diagram. And the diagram can become a problem. And then furthermore, the problem can become construction. And moreover, construction can be held answerable to what it reveals and what it conceals. Enlightenment thus begins when the image is no longer permitted to be the final court of appeal for thought and praxis. Section 3. Euclid, al-Khwarizmi, and the procedural inheritance of philosophy. So between Plato and Descartes stands another transformation, the codification of rational movement. Euclid in Elements gives geometry a form in which reason can travel through definitions, postulates, common notions, data, propositions, demonstrations, so on and so forth. These are not proofs, though. Euclid did not invent the idea of proof. Muslim did it. Sorry. This is not only a mathematical achievement, it actually happens to be also a philosophical event with capital E. precisely because it shows that thought can bind itself to explicit operations, and it can make its movements precisely because they have become made explicit, they can be made reconstructible, and that it can refuse the charisma of intuition by submitting insight to a public order of the agora, which is that of the demonstration. Then al-Khwarizmi enters the scene. Of course, not as this superb, exotic, non-European precursor, but as someone who can be counted as a decisive transformation in the history of procedure itself. The word algorithm is tied to the Latinization, of his name through the medieval algorithmic or algorithm tradition. The formula sometimes associated with that tradition, Dixit al-Khwarizmi, thus spake the algorithm, the procedure, should not be turned into a, kind of like cheesy AI slogan at this point. Its significance solely lies in a territory which is a stranger and older. Because it reminds us that what is now treated as technical noun once named a transmission of methods, right? Procedures and operations across languages, religious worlds, mathematical traditions, and civilizational fantasies of ownership. In the algebraic text, the key operations are al-jabr wal-muqabala, completion or restoration, and balancing and confrontation across an equation. An equation, what is exactly an equation is? Equation is a sign of ultimately, of course, the question is that what does it take for something to be equal to something else, right? But the more fundamental question, which we hardly actually ever talk about, is what is this thing that we call identity? Everyone in continental philosophy hates, after Deleuze, the idea of the identity or identical. But there is a very profound sort of thing behind this. You see, if two things on two sides of an equation hold together as being equal to one another, that's a sign of identity. Identity is not essential in the essentialist sense. Identity is attained by construction, right? I have my identity precisely because you have your identity. Precisely because we are interacting at very specific moments across certain sort of translations, certain sort of equations, and so on and so forth. This is also one of the main ideas behind homotopy type theory. The idea that, well, if we learn the concept of identity of a mathematical object, then we can construct it anew. If we understand the identity of a world, then we can construct it anew. So a problem is transformed unknown, so that its unknown can be approached through a sequence of legitimate manipulations. What is hidden is not guessed, it's brought into relation with what is known. What is distorted is restored. What is excessive is balanced. The equation becomes a battlefield where the unknown is not conquered by force, but obliged to show its relations to what is known. Adolf Grunbaum once said that an unknown that has no relation to what is already known has no case, epistemological case, right? This procedural inheritance lets us hear Descartes differently then. When Descartes speaks of method, order, clarity, division, enumeration, reconstruction, he is not inventing modern rationalism ex nihilo. He is reactivating a long history in which philosophy, mathematics, and procedure have been always entangled. But he does so under a new pressure, which is that of the scholastic order that can no longer account for science's claims to organize, stabilize, and form. The pressure of new mathematics, new optics, new machines, new travels, new wars, new institutions, and new forms of intellectual danger the world has never seen before. There is a dramatic inversion here. What appears you know, in our seminar as a methodical claim is, historically speaking, a form of pure insurgency, which that's actually what Descartes is trying to do, to instigate an insurgency, to define, divide, order, enumerate, balance, reconstruct, is to deny that authority may simply arrive clothed as tradition, revelation, sensory immediacy, or institutional prestige. Method is the etiquette of a mind preparing for a final historical mutiny. Section 4, and then after that, we are going to have a break. Rational mechanics, the gap as algebraic interface and not pathology. Now we can broaden the point through this thing. There is this computer scientist. His name is Emeritus Professor at Stanford. His name is Juan Pratt. And he wrote a series of essays, I think, I don't know, late 70s, in the 80s, and early 90s, with regard to Descartes. Yeah. Because everyone wants just talks, let's say that, well, Descartes is just mind-body problem dualism and that sort of, utterly cheap sort of ways to think about Descartes. And one Pratt started to talk about actually what he's talking about, what Descartes is talking about, from the sort of information that now we have, philosophical, but also from the perspective of, mechanics, computation, statistical mechanics, so on and so forth. Um, and he wrote particularly one really interesting essay, which is called Rational Mechanics and Natural Mathematics. It's Vaughan and Pratt, Pratt. So I just want here to use Pratt carefully. Of course, he's not being introduced as a historian of Descartes or a magical solver of all 17th century problem that Descartes left behind. I think it's helpful here as a speculative formal analog, a way of seeing that the so-called Cartesian gap between mind and body need not be treated immediately as a fundamental pathology. It can be treated as a problem of interaction. Yeah? The gap, therefore, is not necessarily a wound in thought, a trauma. It may be a place where thought first becomes honest about the differences between planes, the conditions of transition, and the cost of thus and so relations. This is where the connection to al-Khwarizmi becomes more than genealogical decoration, in fact. Algebra doesn't abolish the unknown, as I said, but rather it stages it to the foreground. It gives the unknown a position inside an equation, restores missing terms, cancels false asymmetries, and brings opposed sides into a relation in which something can be solved without pretending that differences have all vanished. Al-Jabr wal-Muqabala therefore isn't a metaphor for reconciliation in the sentimental sense. These are fundamental operations for forcing broken or asymmetric terms across different locales and localities um, into a space where their relation becomes tractable. So we can create the reconstruction traces of our own history as subjects. They do not deny the gap, they operationalize it, in fact. You see, this is the whole point. Enlightenment is about operationalizing of, of what is already has made the local subject. They say, let the unknown stand, but not as a mystery with theological privileges, but now let it stand where it can be actually transformed. Seen from this very angle, the Cartesian mind-body problem can be reread as an algebraic problem before it becomes a metaphysical scandal at the hand of some idiots. Mind and body are not simply two unfortunate substances that Descartes left in an awkward room together, and let's see which one comes out of the room after murdering the other. Right. There are two domains whose interaction has not yet been given the right formal grammar. There are two domains whose interaction that I read, the usual complaints which we often hears about Descartes' mind-body uh, problem says Descartes split the world and could not put it back together, right? It split the world into mind and body, and then it couldn't put back together. Bunch of fucking bullshit. But of course, this complaint is often too quick in its judgment. Sometimes the first philosophical achievement is to split correctly. Remember what Plato told us? Cut at the joints, as opposed to splintering the bones. Because a bad unity is only confusion with a crown on its head. A scholastic cognition had many unities, but many of them were merely unexamined, of sense, authority, theology, image, icons, idols, and inherited naturalism, and, of course, essentialism. Descartes' gap is therefore also an act of intellectual hygiene. We should basically sometimes, abide by the laws of intellectual hygiene. Not always, though. It breaks a false continuity so that a real relation can become finally thinkable. So von Pratt's wager is precisely that the between mind and body may be more primitive than the within. The standard objection to Cartesian dualism assumes that interaction between fundamentally dissimilar planes must be harder than interaction inside one plane. Pratt turns these assumptions around. In his reconstruction, events of the body interact with states of the mind. A physical event impresses its occurrence on a mental state, dually. Now, dually is not dualism. When we are talking about duality, we are talking about interaction. Dualism is when you inflate, two terms. One of them is underdefined to another term, and then that would be dualism of some sort, right? Or both terms underdefined. But duality is actually a name for interaction, right? Interaction, confrontation between actions or practices. So a physical event impresses its occurrence on a mental state. Dually, a mental state infers the prior occurrence of the event. Impression runs with time. Inference swims against it. Time flows forward and logic backward. Between them is not a mystical spark, and in fact, not the pineal gland as a metaphysical hardware, not God's emergency service, and in fact, not pre-established harmony, monist evacuation. Between them is an interaction matrix, a space in which physical occurrence and logical uptake become dual aspects of a single and singular rational structure. So this is why Pratt's language is so useful for our purposes. Body-body interaction and mind-mind interaction can be derived as secondary from the primary relation between bodily events and mental states. In often simplified cases, residuation allows one to infer temporal precedence among events and permitted transitions among states by asking what all entities on the opposite side record or allow. Two events do not simply whisper to one another in a sealed physical corridor in a black box. Two states do not simply commune in a private mental chapel. Each relation is tested through the opposite plane. This is a strange and powerful thought. You know, the within is reconstructed through the in between. The interface is not an embarrassment added after the real work is done. The interface is where the real work finally begins. Now we can hear the algebraic resonance more strongly. Al-muqabala means confrontation or balancing across a relation. Pratt's interaction matrix is in a different register, a table of confrontations. Events and states face one another. Occurrence and interference and inference answer one another. Body and mind are not fused, but neither are they merely stranded from one another. The problem becomes one of lawful transformation across differences. The Cartesian gap, widened through al-Khwarizmi and refracted through Pratt, becomes a site of rational mechanics. A mechanics not of dead pushes alone, but of impression, inference, duality, and reconstructible interaction. Here the stakes of enlightenment now sharpen. The hijacked enlightenment loves two equally bad solutions. One is reductive monism. Everything is ultimately body, matter, mechanism, data, biology, economy, computation, this, that. The other is a mystical supplement of it. Whenever relation becomes difficult, insert surreptitiously the word soul, spirit, miracle, transcendence, transcendent, providence, or the sovereign exception. Descartes' problem, read through al-Khwarizmi and Pratt, refuses both, in fact, simultaneously. It demands neither reduction to one side nor a called traffic between two sides, but an intelligible account of how terms interact across real, concrete differences. The gap becomes a demand for an operator. It's not a hole to be filled with piety or plastered over by scienticism or logicism. This also gives us a more precise sense of rational computational mechanics. Computation is not automatic circulation by a black box. It's the organization of acts, traces, transformation, and dual relations. It's a discipline that lets a problem be reconstructed from its very own operations. When a physical event impresses itself on a state, and a state, mental state, and a mental state of mind infers an event, we have an elementary schema for what reason does actually in the world. It receives marks, but it also questions them backwards, questioning back, right? Which I mentioned earlier on. It's affected by events, but it also reconstructs their condition. It's never merely passive reception and never merely sovereign command. Reason lives in the double movement between being impressed upon and inferring what must have actually occurred. So, from this point of view, the cogito also changes. It is not a narcissistic fortress, as people usually, tell Descartes. Well, he's just like in the business of narcissistic solipsism of reason. It is an event state relation under maximum pressure. The act of doubting impresses itself as the event that cannot be erased without performing it again, while the thinking state infers the occurrence of the act that sustains it. Cogito is not simply I am. It is the minimal algebra of self-relation under doubt, a tiny rational mechanics protocol in which event, state, inference, and persistence fold into one another. Descartes does not find a royal subject behind the world. He finds a relation that cannot be cancelled without reinscribing itself. The subject begins not as a substance in repose, but rather as interaction that survives its own attempt at self-abolition. This is a point at which the first session must prepare the second. Elizabeth of Bohemia will not allow this rational mechanics to remain a beautiful diagram. She will demand to know how the interface works when the body is not formal endpoint, but a living, suffering, acting body. Spinoza will then alter the architecture by denying that mind and body require a bridge between two substances at all. Spinoza's immanence is not interesting because it saves us from a stupid Cartesian mistake. It is interesting because it radicalizes a problem Descartes made utterly visible. How can difference be thought without superstition and relation without utter collapse? So let's have a rest and come back, and then we will have questions and answers. Ether, how many minutes do we have at this point? Does anyone know? Oh, sorry, I forgot. Yeah, my apologies. One second. I can't hear anything. Uh, okay,
Okay, about
yes,
an hour
Ether, you were
left, I
saying.
suppose.
Ether is not there.
Uh, how many minutes we have?
Does anyone know how much time we have?
I suppose about an hour at most.
I can't hear anything.
It was supposed to go to 9:30, but you came on later, so
For
maybe
some
we'll.
reason, I don't know. I think that there is some sort of problem here at my end. Um, let me see. 1 second. 1 second. My apologies. My earbuds were in my pocket. That's why I couldn't hear you. So, how much time do we have?
About an hour.
About 1 hour. Okay. So I can actually, fast forward to talk a little bit about Elizabeth, and then we open the question and answers, right? I think that would be good. Of course, I will read the rest of this next session, and then, of course, the Spinoza session. So let me start. So why Elizabeth of Bohemia? Well, the body returns as the problem of interaction. Princess Elizabeth enters here as a supplement, and of course, no longer a polite, genderly corrected addendum from the outside to the problem of enlightenment. Elizabeth enters as a test of the whole operation. In the May-June 1643 correspondence, she presses Descartes on the relation between mind and body by asking, how can an immaterial thinking thing determine a body to move? Good question. Sound? The question, however, is rather devastating for Descartes because it refuses to let Cartesian reduction remain satisfied with abstract distinction, and because it demands an operative account of relation, a concrete operative account of relation or interaction in the Pratt sense. It says, in effect, if you have separated the terms, show the algebra by which they answer to one another, really, on paper. Show me the goddamn algebra here. This is why Elizabeth belongs precisely in this seminar. After al-Khwarizmi and after the speculative detour through Pratt. Her question is not just why did you split mind and body? It's actually quite sharper. Having split them, what makes the relation intelligible at the end? between mind and body, right? What is the rule of correspondence here? What is the operator? What restores and balances the terms without fraud? She asked Descartes to perform al-Jabr wal-Muqabala on his own goddamn metaphysics. Restore the missing relation, balance the two sides. Do not smuggle at this point the bridge in through metaphor and then call it Enlightenment philosophy. The temptation is to treat Elizabeth as merely refuting Descartes. And some people have done that. I think it's kind of a cheap move because these two were really, interlocutors, the best interlocutors of their own time. On the other hand, I think she forces Cartesianism to become responsible for its own dualities, not dualism, dualities. If thought has distinguished mind and body, if it has separated the act of thinking from the extended thing, if it has used reduction to clarify what had been confused, then it must also explain how these clarified terms bear upon lived experience, action, illness, effect, sex, decision, gender, fatigue, pain, hunger, and the conduct of life. So what Elizabeth asks is that what happens to method when the problem is no longer merely to know an object, but to live as an embodied rational being, a human subject? Her intervention prevents the Cartesian subject from ossifying into a sovereign abstraction. It demonstrates that the formation of the subject of science cannot mean the evacuation of embodiment. It means that embodiment becomes a problem to be thought without surrendering to the first image of the body we have. Ouch. That's a really, precisely the first body of the image that we have of ourselves is just a meat bag. Right? The body is not simply an obstacle to reason, nor a mute machine waiting for mental command from high above. It is a site at which causal, affective, practical, and epistemic relations ultimately converge. The body is not the ruin of the method in this sense. It's the demand that method become adequate to a more difficult problem, yet etched in the history of enlightenment. Elizabeth's question also exposes the inadequacy of any enlightenment. It confuses abstraction with emancipation. Sure, abstraction is powerful only when it can return to the body without panic, disgust, horror, or metaphysical improvisation. Otherwise, the abstract subject becomes one more polished idol, an image of reason that cannot survive fever, depression, appetite, injury, dependency, fatigue, or great grief. A philosophy that cannot pass through the body is not too pure for politics. It's unfortunately extremely underdeveloped. This is also where Pratt's speculative formalism and Elizabeth's philosophical pressure diverge rather productively, I must say. Pratt gives us a formal imagination of interaction, event and states, events being of the body and states being of the mind. Impression and inference, time and logic. Between plane relation as primary. Elizabeth gives us the existential and practical cost of the same demand. For she asks not only whether a relation can be modeled, but whether it can account for the lived unity of a person who thinks, suffers, governs herself, and is acted upon by the world. So she doesn't let the matrix become another cave image, but rather she asks and questions us what the matrix can do when the body is ill, when the passions disturb our judgments, when the conduct of life cannot wait for metaphysical tidiness. Her question prepares the transition to Spinoza without making Spinoza, a cheap afterthought solution. So Descartes gives us reduction, method, and the experimental chamber of the meditator. Al-Khwarizmi gives us the procedural drama of restoring and balancing terms across a relation, or worlds, in fact, if we want to be a little bit more ambitious at this point. Pratt lets us glimpse how interaction itself might be treated as primary rather than as an afterthought. Elizabeth then asks whether this entire apparatus can survive contact with a living body. Spinoza will radicalize this question ultimately. What if mind and body are not two substances requiring miraculous coordination, but two expressions under different attributes on a one immanent, unholy order? What if emancipation begins not by escaping nature, but by understanding our place within its conditions of possibility? Thank you so much. So, questions? Oh, Neve and who was that? Yes, Zachary, Neve. I think Zachary, then Neve, then Arnab, then Aryo. My apologies, I cannot see these fonts anymore. So please go on.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm super interested in this question of difference and relation that appears to regenerate at different scales. You have al-muqabila, which is the balancing on either side of the equation. You have the dialogic exchange of Elizabeth and Descartes. You have the body and soul. But then you also have kind of this persistent theme in the lecture of cultural dislocation as the instigation to enlightenment. And al-Khwarizmi, of course, is not just Islamic. He's a Persian guy from what's now like Uzbekistan and Baghdad, writing about, very old Arab kinship and Islamic kinship regulation. And that's what he's trying to solve, right? So there's this way in which the engagement with cultural particularity and the particularities of cultural difference, in the case of this rational subject, precipitates the reaching for something else. Like he says, well, why don't I use Vedic formulas, which are derived from Hindu ritual contexts, to solve Arab inheritance problems? Neither of them are his, culturally speaking, right? But he is able to build this
Right.
bridge, and it's not just a bunch of stuff to him. So my question is really like, to what extent is this, let's say, failure of enlightenment to go far enough? I understand, like, we don't want to just put the Islamicate civilization on a pedestal and act like they had all the answers. They were quite imperializing and so on. But to what extent is, what we see now, where the idolatry of the alien, the idolatry of the outside, in many ways is just kind of an image that's been draped over people just don't want to read al-Khwarizmi, or they just don't want to engage with cultural difference as something in which universality can be discovered through reduction to particulars and deep engagement with particulars. And to what extent, like, is the socially embedded nature of intelligence not intelligence embedded within the community, but intelligence embedded within this kind of dislocated capacity for dialogue that you get with, for example, Arabic functioning as, a medium of communication, right? I mean, it is, and it's kind of one that is stabilized through divine authority, but it's quite important that this is happening dialogically. And I just wonder if that changes what we mean when we say intelligence is socially embedded, rather than that means it's community dependent and boxed in. It rather means that it precipitates, it's a particular reaction to the condition of dislocation. There are many possible reactions, as we know, but I wonder if there's
Yes. Yes. Well, I don't have the best answer for you, but I have the best work
Hmm.
in mind to answer some of your questions. It's so I at the beginning I mentioned so Ibn Tufayl
Yeah.
wrote Hayy ibn Yahsan, which is essentially the prequel to Robinson Crusoe,
Yeah.
Desert Island Tales. And it was translated to Latin as Philosophus Autodidactus, autodidactic philosopher. Then Ibn Nafis came and wrote this magnificent book, unbelievable. It's considered to be the first philosophical sci-fi
Hmm.
ever written. In fact, the first sci-fi ever written. It's called رسالة الكاملية في الأحلال النبوية, meaning that a treatise of Kamil on the people of the prophet.
Hmm.
And the problem of this book is quite severe. So, you have the Robinson, you don't get Friday, unfortunately, in this story. And Robinson, just like create a community of trees, everything around himself. And then he just starts to boat around in this um, tiny conglomeration of islands. And he finally meets the first person. And he always thinks from his own mind. He speculates. Why is that, for example, the stars move in this direction? Why is that, for example, this is this? Why is that this, that? And then he he thinks that it's just very particular to his own kind, meaning Robinson Crusoe mentality, a desert island child. And then he sees another person on another desert island in this configuration. And then the second person actually had the same sort of thoughts, but with different beliefs. And then they become friends, they become buddies. and they start to boat together now to discover more. And then they come across different sort of islands, and everyone understands something very profound about cosmos and about what human might be, except that they cannot actually exactly say what this is, right? And then finally, the end scene, when they finally understand who they are, well, basically, they are aliens, you know? For some stupid reason, they have ended up on a terrestrial sublunary slum called Earth. And then when they understand this, unfortunately, an event happens, which is al-Qiyamah,
Mm.
the day of resurrection. So at this point, they have nothing to do other than just, waiting for the day of their own judgments. I think it's quite, universalism is dangerous precisely because of this, not because of the dangers of colonialism, because that's universalism with uniformity. Universalism is dangerous precisely because once we actually understand what we have always been doing, God might transpire.
And this is not Hayy ibn Miqdad that you're talking about. This is another Risalat fi, what was it? Risalat
رسالة الكاملية في الأحلى النبوية.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Uh, is Neve here?
Yeah, yeah. Can you
Yes.
hear me okay?
Of course. You're getting a
Okay,
little
good.
bit caught up, but it's fine. It's fine. Go on.
Okay, good.
Love you.
Yeah, how you doing? Great seminar. Thanks so much. So yeah, I missed a little bit in between, so forgive me if my question is kind of maybe has been answered or been asked. But what I'm kind of curious about is going back to the question of universalism, of reason, not having a home. It doesn't need to belong, you say, but ideally it should cover all places, as a universalism. And I think you did address the aspect of universalism not being about uniformity. But of course, the kind of criticism, will be that it's a, flattening of space in order for their, for reason to instate itself. So I did a really interesting seminar series with Matt Hare, as I'm sure you know, on Cavaillés, and
Of course, I know Matt.
yeah. So
The
he
grumpy
was.
man, the grumpy man of mathematics.
Oh, really? Is it? Oh, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, he was talking about Descartes, Descartes' analytic, and one of the things that was really interesting about that was that Descartes had this theory of no total samul, no all at onceness. Of course, when he's talking about representation, we are in time and in human representation. And I guess actually, this is talking about Descartes as the sort of the revolution of the theory of representation. Also, then of course, its validity, its justification as a claim. And I'm just kind of wondering about is this being sort of relative to the omnipresent being who is necessarily all at once. And I guess some of this will be coming into play in relation to some of the disputes with Newton that Descartes has, where the whole question of action at a distance. And yeah, okay, finally, just to say, I'm just wondering about I don't know if I picked up rightly that we were talking about the self-inferiority problem of the Enlightenment itself, introducing representation as a technique of mind mind body, split, where you speak about it in a kind of in an alien sense, of the human. That this also there is a kind of purging of the divine, and the religious omnipresence. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yes, I'm going to give you an answer, because the question is extremely multi-layered. And please, Neve, tell me if I'm just utterly, going off the track at this point. Yes, of course. Let's talk about this question of the alien, right? Who are the aliens, right? It's essentially the problem comes to this that um, everything comes ultimately to the method and techniques, right? Um, for us to expand our world cognitively, but also physically, probably. And European Enlightenment, tried to take this extremely literally by expanding its world geographically, which, amounted to colonialism as we know it. It's a technical mastery, right? But then we can think about this in a different way, in a sense that we say, well, how about we think about this cognitively, that to think a different world requires new techniques. Otherwise, you cannot do it. Right? And if you do that, most probably we have done that already, you will achieve some sort of effect of alienness, not alienation, alienness. You feel as if the world no longer belongs to you. Earth is not your home anymore. There is this great story that Cordwainer Smith, the sci-fi author, who also was a high-ranking CIA officer, Paul Leinbarger, uh, wrote, manual for the psychological warfare. But also he's also rumored to be one of the most famous psychological patients ever recorded. His name or pseudonym is Kirk Allen. So Kirk Allen goes to his psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist says, this patient is so resistant to all sort of questions I ask. He doesn't want to say that anything is wrong with him. After 3 sessions, upon pressing him more interrogations, he finally, the patient named Kirk Allen, which is called Wayner Smith most probably, gives up. And he said, well, screw this. I don't belong here. My boss sent me to this session with you precisely because the last time that I missed my deadline after 10 times, he told me that why is that you are missing your deadlines? Because you never missed your deadlines back in the day. He said, well, I am so sorry. I will promise you to spend more time on planet Earth. Do you understand the meaning of that? So this is the idea of the human. We just don't want to spend time on some bullshit homeland, on Earth, the order of Himat, homeland, this, that. In fact, it is becoming quite clear that every person who says that, well, I want to spend more time in my homeland, happens to be a goddamn fascist at this point. So I would say, yes, all of this connects with one another in terms of method, in terms of alienness. But our alienness is not alienness in a kind of cheesy, green, alien man. It's just because we are alien in a sense that we can always, through enlightenment, reinvent of the very methods through which we came across the conditions of possibilities of our subjecthood. And so as geography, so as history, so as this, so as that. That, by all definitions, I think it makes us alien. Neve.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, yes. So yeah, so I think that there is a huge amount of stuff going on behind this idea of enlightenment and subjects, political subject, revolutionary subject, global subject, local subject, so on and so forth. I would say that, well, if we are talking about subject, if we are talking about revolution, if we are talking about this and that, none of this makes it less alien. In fact, if we look at it from a God's eye view, hypothetical, Archimedean point of view, there is something very peculiar about, first, the human subject and also the task or the tasks which the human subject often subscribes to. This is, I think, what the Enlightenment already is. It's a certain sort of protocols. We don't know whether they were deterministic, meaning that they were inevitably going to unfold, or it was just like, us doing it, or, the religious dogma not in a bad way, that sentence that God told me to. Well, God told me to, it might be as well, you can say that aliens told me to, right? That there is something very specific with human conduct in a sense of how it proliferates its cognition, its practices, sometimes by way of military devices, sometimes by, religion, sometimes by this, sometimes by that. But there is a beauty in it. There is a beauty in it, but also a fundamental sinisterness. A sinisterness that I think that we should take it extremely seriously, precisely because it shows that humans have the capacity to do extreme feats of enlightenment and revolution, and also regression to the human cave of themselves. One of the greatest figures that has talked about this is Sha'abuddin Yahya Sohrawardi, the Muslim scholar who got martyred, executed. And he had this idea, well, basically, what is light, if not the light upon the human? That humans always, in a very strange sort of ritualistic sort of way, once they want light to be, projected upon them, not out of narcissistic syndromes, but precisely because to understand who they are and what they can do ultimately. And humans can do a lot of shit.
Yeah, what you seem to be saying is that enlightenment rationality is a commitment to a trajectory of reconciling with a kind of with the mobility that techniques provide, but reconciling
It's
with
a
a kind of
reconciliation with the matrix
with.
where they have come from ultimately.
Mhm.
And this reconciliation of the matrix, you might say that, well, all matrices are natural, but you might say that, well, what if the matrix was actually of alien origin? Yeah. I am not going to talk about sci-fi here. I'm talking about it in a very rational sort of way, that yes, that there is a certain sort of tendency for humans to reconcile precisely through questioning back, going
Yeah.
into the foundations to reconcile with where they came from. And then humans become extremely depressed if they find out that they only came from planet Earth. That would be a bad news for humans.
Yeah. Just one last thing I would just say is I'm trying to get my head around the principle of identity that you introduce in speaking about equations. And for me, very often, maybe it's the kind of critique of enlightenment, as a kind of a dogma, that sees that attached to kind of belonging, and belonging to place, and
Entrenched
whereas
identity,
you're
yes.
mobilizing you're mobilizing identity though within a technique that is about mobility, and precisely not about trying to root and to belong in relation to that or through it.
Yes, that brings the one of the first things that you said, home, the question of home. Well, the question of home always makes sense for so many people who had been kind of, forced out of their homes,
Mm.
right? I'm not going to name names, but we know what we are talking about at this point. People who have been, lost their homes, went to Europe, then exterminated in mass, and, seizing another home, thinking it's their home. Well, the question of home is not really interesting. Reason doesn't have a home. Humans don't
Yeah.
have a home. If we really question back to what we are, this is the question of enlightenment, to strip back the facade of our homeliness. And I think that if you think AI is an strange news for humans, I think that we can survive a few more centuries without the problems of climate change. We will see some other sort of things that are utterly unbelievable with regard to the origins of possible humans.
Thanks so much, Reza. Thank you.
Absolutely. Arnab,
Thank you, Reza, for the great seminar. The first class, it was amazing actually, and the way you traced the 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 journey of uh, the dialogue of worlds, the meeting of worlds, the journey of um, the subject and the the phenomena of the phenomenon of the enlightenment. So,
yes.
what my question was about, uh, I was thinking of the final step where uh, E- Elizabeth was talking about the interface of the in between the mind and the body. I was thinking of the concept of mediation, and where does that stand in case of the Cartesian uh, divide, if
No, I mean,
or
mediation is absolutely
the duality?
fundamental, precisely because the whole idea of enlightenment in one single sentence is the abolition of the myth of epistemological, ontological, computational, or transcendent immediacy. Yeah? So everything always begins with mediation. But the whole point is that, well, it's not as if Descartes wants to say, well, immanence is a stupid idea. No. Or immediacy is a charade of a philosophical concept. But rather that when we try to think about such ideas and in praxis and in thought, in cognition, theoretical, practical, we have to always think that we arrive at certain sort of ideas of immediacy or immanence, which are not actually equivocal, by way of certain sort of mediations. But what are the procedures or principles of such mediations that can be, they can be, transferred, translated across continents, across locales of cognitions and praxis, and so on and so forth. So I think this is the revolutionary core of the Enlightenment, precisely because, in that sense, Descartes wants to say, well, these are the principles, right? And we are always dealing with mediations. We don't have an immediate access to immediacy, so to speak. If that is the case,
Absolutely, absolutely,
yeah,
Reza.
how are we going to proliferate? Yeah, proliferate these methods of questioning back, stripping back to what connects us all. Well, if it connects, that's what make Cartesian thought a little bit too dangerous for human mind. Precisely because if you do that and you take it with complete elegance and not distortion, you know, if all
Right,
of
right.
us across different desert islands claw back to the origins, we will see that, oh my God, where we have come from. And it's not just Darwinian principle.
Absolutely. Yes. Because Reza, I was also thinking a second point about that mediation can also be uh, is the core of the Cartesian philosophy, but it can be very dangerous also because we mediate through the limits of our knowledge and our fears, our imaginaries. So
Absolutely. We we
in
we
in in
we
that respect, when we mediate from yes,
yes, yes. No, no, no. We absolutely you are right. We mediate or meditate at the edge of our bodies. Our bodies are
right,
always
absolutely,
limited.
absolutely. Exactly, we are finite beings, and that limitation, uh, when we mediate through our the limits of our bodies, our being, and also our uh, imaginaries, our fears, then mutations occur, dangerous mutations that leads to the kind of uh, from massacres to genocide to wars, all of it, and misunderstandings, through
Absolutely, absolutely,
misunderstandings.
absolutely, absolutely. No, I mean, Descartes ultimately wants to create a philosophy in the contemporary sense, to appropriate William Wimsatt's, a philosophy for limited beings destined
Right.
for being unlimited. Yeah, that's the job of enlightenment.
It's beautiful, actually, and it's Promethean also.
It is utterly, it's in fact far above Prometheanism, precisely
Yes,
because you ascend into the dark
yeah, yes, absolutely.
with rainbows, sans unicorns.
Right. Thank you, Reza. Thank you.
Absolutely. Next, is it Alo? My apologies. I cannot see the names at this point. I'm so sorry. My sight is so bad that it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah, thank you so much. That was amazing. I guess my question is about this conception of enlightenment as the critique of false images and specifically the inquiry into the conditions under which these false images take on their authority in relation to meditation 4. Because there error, it is this kind of mirage projected over nothingness. And you said that it kind of beckons you into the wasteland or the desert. But because Descartes doesn't ascribe any kind of formal cause behind these illusions, I just wonder how we can account for that authority, the kind of compelling force that leads us to grasp these illusions. Because at certain moments, I feel like Descartes kind of saying that the subject of science is maybe constitutively blind to the ideological causes of illusion. But then I wonder where that leaves a kind of genealogical inquiry into the causes of illusions if they're constitutively blind to those. I don't know if that makes
No,
sense.
no, no, it makes sense. It's a difficult question though. I think Descartes' primary objective is to, kind of combat and put a brutality move in Mortal Kombat sense on high church of higher scholasticism. He's not really interested in what exactly might happen afterwards. That's his weakness, Achilles' heel. As I said, he's a fundamental Christian. No doubt about it. You see, the fact that enlightenment, even in the European sense, has been instigated by some of the most religious people on earth, Descartes and Spinoza, says something about what enlightenment was supposed to be, right? Spinoza, every time that he walks, other Jews like shoot shit at him and tell him bad names and so on and so forth. I mean, is there any more Jewish person than Spinoza? Really, I just want to know. Is there any more Christian person who can come forward than Descartes? No, absolutely not. I think their primary mission objective was just really to purge false religions. But you see, purging false religion is not an easy task. Precisely because the moment that you think that you have purged it, idolatry shows its face. Hence, Plato's suspicion of images. Images always take hold upon cognition. And once images take hold, power takes hold. And so has authorization. I think this has happened. How it's going to move forward is quite going to be very speculative. I don't think that, to be honest with you, enlightenment, after this sort of dynasty of degradations, can survive. We are essentially moving toward the age of darkness. And unfortunately, this age of darkness is not Aristotelian higher scholasticism, because that was exciting. Yeah? No. This is it. Most probably. Yeah, of course, there will be always underground movements, as during the higher scholastic era, certain sort of people work against that sort of tendencies. But I think that humans always tend to essentialize themselves. And by essentializing themselves, they connect themselves with an essentialized God. When you essentialize God, then you essentialize method, essentialize techniques, and so on and so forth. And after that, when the entire system is deployed, I don't think there is a way out of this trap. I think that we have created a trap for ourselves. And getting out of this trap, I would say, is if not extremely difficult, but it would be extremely costly. But if Project Enlightenment is about always the future, as Descartes and Spinoza, envisioned it, then maybe we should actually pay the cost right now and let our children go free, whoever or whatever they may be. It's pessimistic, sorry that I gave you a very pessimistic.
One more. I mean, do you see Kant with his ideas with transcendental illusion as kind of trying to, I mean, as effectively ending the Enlightenment by structurally like ensuring that reason is subordinated to these kinds of false images that
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And of course, it's not just Kant, it's just also Nick Land.
Mhm.
There is a fundamental problem here, precisely because certain sort of philosophers at some points in time noticed that the hijacked Enlightenment is going to be a ruin for the entire planet, right? And then they started to rise against it. Nietzsche is a great example. Thus spake Zarathustra, right? Instead of thus spake algorithmi. Nietzsche knew exactly what might happen. Um, so yes, it's not that my idea of resurrecting enlightenment is a good idea. I'm just saying that, well, it's worthwhile to resurrect it one last time, see what might happen. Well, otherwise, uh, within a computer program, different scenarios of enlightenment that we have simulated across the globe have always failed, unfortunately. Yeah. But we should always understand why a program fails. I'm an engineer, right, by training. Why a program fails and how it can be corrected. Just because a program fails doesn't mean a hypothesis is not real. So, next one, my apologies, I cannot see your name.
Yeah, so I think it's me.
Mihai.
Yeah. Thank you for the great seminar. I was really struck by the idea of the cave as a political technology, and I have like two short interrelated questions. On the side of the subject formation, I was thinking of how can we transform that individual subject formation, or how can we attune it to a social formation or to a collective formation? Because I think that that would be the actual end goal of it all, not to produce individual subjects, but to actually transform the collective, all of the collective sphere. And also on this same topic, I was also thinking if there are any socio-political counterparts of this authentic Enlightenment revolution you spoke about. Like, do you see I don't know, historical examples, like do you see the Paris Commune as being one, or the Soviet Revolution, or was there an actual instantiation of this Enlightenment protocols? Thank you.
So you see, the subject always appears as an individual, but the conditions of constitution of a subject is collective. Hence, a subject is not an individual, is through and through a collective. Precisely because the subject abstractly, concretely, and determinately shows what it has come from, where it has come from, right? That's something that we always need to remember, that, when we are talking about subject, individual subject, even Descartesian subject, it's not the condition of possibility of a secular subject, but a collective subject, right? Subjectivity always already is intersubjectivity, so to speak, right? And with regard to the examples, well, I don't think that we can say that, well, oh, well, can we have an example of this? Can we have an example of that? No. If we really look into the history of humankind and history par excellence, I think the whole better idea, the better question is that, would be that, Reza, do you think that, for example, the move from the Bolshevik Revolution to Islamic Revolution captures this subjectivity? So we have to talk about processes, right? Rather than an exact historical example at a very specific time, because that never actually exhausts the possibilities of the subject or the possibilities of what we are actually talking about. But if we are talking about the processes, I would say that, well, sure. Most probably, there would be exemplars of this, but they haven't come. But more gravely, every sort of exemplars of this sort of processes that we ever had turned into shit. Yeah, I mean, there is this, I will try to translate this at some point. There is this piece by Murad Faradpour. Is a leftist philosopher in Iran, very smart philosopher and translator. And he wrote this thing that, well, Islamic Republic is just the bastard child of Bolshevik Revolution, right? Cannibalizing its own children day in, day out. Look, after all this stuff that has happened, I think this is completely a very sound thesis. Massacres, war, coup d'etat, so on and so forth. So, David, you haven't talked.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know if I was next in line, but I'll take the chance. Thank you. Thank you so much, Reza.
Sorry, Mika, I think that we have two Mikas. Sorry, Mika, please apologize if I bumped you down.
I already went, so he can go.
Yes, okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mika. I wanted to ask you, maybe this has nothing to do, so if it's too far-fetched, please tell me. But going back to images and the critique of images by Plato and Descartes, um, I connected it with the concept of images in Bergson, Henri Bergson.
Yes.
I was just like trying to think how would a project like that of Bergson, which also influences Deleuze and his attempt at inverting Platonism and like vindicating simulacra against like the real thing, etc. Like how would that um, project from Bergson to Deleuze would fit or be against this genealogy of enlightenment, which is premised upon the critique of images. I don't know if that's intelligible.
Yeah, no. I think it absolutely fits into the genealogy. The only thing that doesn't fit is when you smuggle a high dose of vitalism into the formula, where basically this become a scholasticism, right? Aristotelianism, right? But the reversion, even the veneration of simulacra as a critical foil against, Plato's suspicion is all fine. When it becomes a little bit pathological, I have noticed, is when, you just bring in a lot of vitalistic presuppositions into the fold. At that point, yes, it of course becomes Aristotelianism. And I had this magnificent students who told me that, Reza, it's a travesty for you to insult Aristotle. I said, okay, sorry. And I said, but precisely because Aristotle contributed so much to science, philosophy essentially became a handmaiden of sciences themselves. And sciences ultimately are going to go up, create a singularity event where basically, you cannot catch science with philosophy. And at that very moment, philosophy shows its limits. I think that the real genuine mistake of Aristotle and scholasticism, particularly higher scholasticism, was that they really genuinely thought that philosophy can achieve the status of science, but of course it cannot achieve it. These are two different categories. Plato always thought that no, let's just think about philosophy as opposed to science. Let's think about time. Let's think about metaphysics. Let's think about forms. Let's think about Parmenides, the old man of Adabra, such that we can actually put our heads wrapping around certain sort of problems that most probably even a future science cannot wrap its mind around. You see, this is I think the twist. So Aristotle really genuinely one of the greatest philosophers of all time, but precisely because he accelerated the philosophy or the philosophical thesis towards science, well, at some point, simply science becomes better than philosophy in certain sort of claims, right? And at that point, you can't actually say, well, oh, well, philosophy is not a handmaiden of science. No, in that sense, a scholastic sense, philosophy becomes a handmaiden of science because science can tell you much better stories about natural events, about causal interactions, and so on and so forth than philosophy can ever do. But what Plato does, he thinks philosophy is the disciple or the discipline of time itself, right? In a sense, that there would be dozen so metaphysical problems, but these are not exactly metaphysical problems. These are metaphysical problems precisely because we haven't had time to think about them thoroughly. And he says, well, in Parmenides, in Philebus, and so on and so forth, that, well, we can actually just talk about these sort of problems. Maybe we can arrive at the gates of Atlantis, New World. I think that is very quite true. So it's just that these two philosophers have fundamentally different approaches to the relation between science and philosophy. One wants to make philosophy akin to science. And of course, if you really push philosophy toward that direction, philosophy ultimately fails because philosophy is not really a science. And then hence you get really a bad enlightenment that we have today. We say that, well, Dawkins and who's that? Um, the guy who got canceled, Me Too, the astrobiologist, astrophysicist, the guy who was a public figure in America, uh, Tyson. What was that? What was his name?
deGrasse Tyson.
Yes. And, there was this thing that Dawkins and him had a, bro moment. And then literally there's this huge audience out there. And then someone said, well, can I go to philosophy department? And Tyson said about it, no, this is the worst. This is the worst that can happen to any human being, to go to a philosophy or learn philosophy. Because science breaks philosophy. And then Dawkins, being a goddamn jerk as always, says, yes, yes, that's very true, very true. And then they start having an internal conversation, and well, basically, Tyson says that, well, when if I want to die, I want to die on planet Earth, and I don't want to be incinerated. Who gives a fuck? I want my body to be buried in the you know, in the soil, so my energy goes back to the planet Earth. God damn. These stupid scientists. But you see that they are really the end game of the genealogy of Aristotelianism, essentially. Yeah? A proper Platonic philosopher. Even goddamn Alain Badiou would never say something this on TV. Mika,
Yeah, maybe it can be quick. I just don't know if I understand the Spinozan immanence as related to Descartes. I'm not going to call it a project. I'm black of words, but like the algorithm, is it like summary of his kind of like method in creation of a subject is the immanence? I don't know the relationship between the two. I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
so well, you have to wait for the next session. So, in a very small formulaic sort of way, if I may say so, you see, Descartes wants a fundamental methodological approach. Spinoza wants to essentially change the substrate of thought itself, right?
To what?
To nature, to nature, God as nature, right?
Okay. All right. Okay, that's all. I have simple questions. Yeah,
But they can converge, but they can converge. Both of them they can converge.
yeah, that's why I think that it's almost as if he can like summarize the entirety of what's his name? Descartes um in all his permutations as the immanence because it is just nature in the end. But maybe it's too reductionist. Um,
I don't
I
think
just
that Descartes is actually a naturist person.
yeah,
Descartes is an engineer of reduction itself,
yeah,
in a sense that he wants to really go back, see, according to Euclid, yeah,
yeah,
think about every sort of Euclid diagrams. You can reduce the entire diagram to a bunch
yeah.
of definitions, data, demonstrations, so on and so forth, laws. And these are not laws exactly. These are, ways of manipulating a diagram, a logical diagram.
Sure.
Um, this is Descartes' problem. Spinoza's problem is that, well, let's just can God at this point and call it nature, right?
Yeah,
And the way that ultimately, of course, that so many people think that Spinoza is anti-Cartesian sort of figure, but I don't think so. Precisely because they really converge in the same problem, and that's problem is the most important one, which is that of the Enlightenment.
okay. I guess I'll wait for the next one. Thank you.
Love you. Evan,
Um, Hi again. So, sorry. Yes.
love you. Don't worry.
Okay, I had a little bit too much going on, but I just want to like simplify to one thing. So, since like the Enlightenment was about this the response maybe to an illogical, dogmatic, religious way of thinking, against, like, it was using the reason, of course, right?
It wasn't, though. It wasn't. Enlightenment was a response to a certain sort of bad naturalism initiated by a scholastic church. A bad reading of Aristotle, unfortunately.
Okay, I take that too. So, like, essentially, a religion is also a bad reading of nature, in my opinion. Like you said, the resurrection of the Enlightenment again. But I want to ask, like, in which terms? Because, like, now is a violent era, which is going also unreasonably bad, which is, I think, a unhealthy reading of science is causing that, or, like, obviously a misuse of power, like inequality, but essentially it's like there are possibilities that we could do, but we are not doing them, but we could. So, like, in which terms enlightenment would come again, resurrect again, as, like, what would, or which tools would its frontiers?
To answer that question, I think that we should ask ourselves, what exactly happened to enlightenment to become this authoritarian figure at this point, right? You cannot assault on an authoritative system if you do not understand what its genealogy is, or where it has come from, or how it has been assembled, insofar as now we are actually beginning to, I would say, lightly understand why we have arrived in this shitty world of ours, right? But otherwise, unless we cannot answer these sort of questions, that how this enlightenment becomes this, and this enlightenment was hijacked by by certain sort of economic, social, political systems so effectively, I don't think that we can actually answer the question. If we cannot actually say, for example, how and why
But
certain
can't
sort
we
of strands of enlightenment contributed to the rise of libertarian or neo-libertarian capitalism, we cannot disassemble the system itself. Please go on.
Sorry for the noise. I was gonna say, can't we but can't we de-engineer, like, engineering backwards towards, like, when did this establishment started? Because, like, what could we even do?
Sure, we can. Under ideal conditions, we would be able to disassemble or de-engineer, as you say, a system toward its conditions of possibility, so we can learn it anew. But precisely because we are dominated by a very specific system of engineering, of cognition, praxis, and technique, that is a little bit becoming tricky.
But
How are you
yeah,
going to disassemble the system of enlightenment if the system of enlightenment has been hijacked by, certain sort of strains of highly
yeah,
advanced forms of social capitalism? Yeah, you can't. You can't.
yeah. No, true. And more people are not buying it, like, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Love you. So, Noah,
Hi. Uh, Thanks to Reza and also some really great questions and fun. I kind of want to ask about basically time. You mentioned it earlier, and I don't know if this is coherent, but the way that I think about the the mind and the body meeting is time, and that's also, I don't know if that's accurate now that I say it. Um, but time seems to be something that's missing. I don't know, in the way that Descartes has been describing, and actually the intervention that Elizabeth brings is like, yeah, what happens in this encounter? How can these things encounter each other? And I feel like time is an answer to that. I think my question is, does that make sense? Is that coherent?
is utterly coherent. And I exactly know what you are trying to say with regard to question of time, but I want you to expand a little bit on this for the
Okay,
rest of the students.
sure. When we talked about how the project that Descartes is kind of engaging in is a certain amount of self-introspection that he also mentions in his reflections, that he didn't start his actual method for a while. I think he said he was 23 when he came up with it, but then he said,
Yes, yes.
I have to kind of wait and spend time experiencing things, living. And he talks about how the circumstances of the war that brought him about, and he kind of chose how he uses time in a very active way. Um, and when we were talking about earlier about how the things that we're trying to find out in his methods, using his methods, are where we came from, which is the dimension of time in the past. And what we've been thinking about, how this future that we are looking at looks rather bleak, that's also a dimension of time. I guess what I could be asking is, how do we, if we want to think about what to do in the future, how do we engineer the time we have? How do we use it like Descartes chose to use his to get to work through the method that he came up for himself? I guess
Yeah.
yeah.
So you see, for anyone who has read the poem on nature by Parmenides, the old man of Adabra, upon which Plato writes a dialogue, none other than the rest. It is when we read Parmenides, the Platonic dialogue, it's finally revealed that Socrates was the most vulgar philosopher of our time. essentially, so precisely because it's like a late dialogue. Precisely because Socrates, at this point, has, exhausted his currency in philosophy. And then the old man comes, Parmenides, utterly crushes Socrates in the dialogues, fundamentally. And who is Parmenides? Is often being called the prophet of time. But what sort of time? He's not Heraclitean prophet. He doesn't believe in becoming. He believes in a certain sort of block universe or block time idea where basically time can actually move backward and outward into the future. So what is actually, you might ask, the weight of this reintroduction of Parmenides in Plato's dialogues might mean? Well, precisely because when we are talking about techniques, when we are talking about methods, we are talking about things. Some of it has been, borrowed from the future, and some of it borrowed from the past. Isn't it the case that every technique that we know is essentially a hybrid time sorcery? Past and the future collided in a very exact moment, compressed, and then the rest of humanity takes as its fundamental duty to uncompress the technique itself. Deception, the invention of a lever, the invention of a cork screw. All of these are something quite, strange. Because sure, a corkscrew has been made by the combination of a lever and a corkscrew, so to speak, right? So you can create, the Archimedean way of getting water from deep soil. Yeah. But what is really important here for us to think about is that techniques, in a very strange sort of way, have something from the past and something from the future. And the moment that these two ideas or indexes of time converge upon a very singular object, a technique is reinvented. Hence, aliens are fucking real.
Yeah.
Something that comes from the future, something comes from the past, and then there is a convergence, and this convergence computationally allows us to move forward, right? Build on this technique, and then, oh shit, then we notice that, oh, we have always been in a CCRU sort of way, but I don't want to mention CCRU at this point. We have always been the puppets, unfortunately, of certain sort of technical apparatus of our own making. And that's when time shows. Because time is fundamentally asymmetrical. Boltzmann understood this. That there is, when we are thinking about time, we are always thinking about nowhere. Techniques that we are making are made out of nowhere principles. From nowhere, we conquer the planets. And Allahu Akbar.
Can I say something?
Sure.
The time comes from the body, I guess.
Time's not, see, there are two times. As I said, one, the times of the body and times of the mind. Times of the mind is the view from no when. The times of the body is view from nowhere. And then they clash ultimately.
I think I would oppose that. Times of the body is from somewhere, but times of the mind can be nowhere.
Would you be able to tell me that what your body is?
In a time way or in
Any
somewhere
sort
way?
of human body, any sort of human body, any sort of human body. Would you be able to tell me that is it actually coming from an explicit somewhere? No, it's coming from nowhere. Precisely because
No, but
you have
you
this
think like
body insofar as you have been inserted within the communities of other bodies.
hmm. But it's like natural thing. It's a natural thing that body is from somewhere, I guess.
It is from somewhere, but what we do, we haven't from an intelligence perspective, intelligence signal processing, we haven't, you know, detected what the source might be, you know. Some people call it gods. Some people call it aliens. Some people call it, alien sex, this and that. But that's
I'm just
actually the
going from
problem here.
I'm just going from the duality of Descartes because I think that's the best assumption of his. Like it's the wrong one essentially. I'm totally agreeing with Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia. She said it right. Like it's interesting to try to separate body and mind. I mean, it's
It's
and because it's
methodologically necessary. It's not
versatile.
an ontological problem. You see, it's methodologically necessary to separate two problems from one another, according to al-Khwarizmi. So Descartes is actually doing an algebra problem, such that you can actually shed light on the identity of both body and the mind. Because otherwise, it would be just like, some sort of, what you might call to be a chunk of indistinguished problem.
But sorry, my battery is low, so I have to.
No worries, no worries, no worries.
So by separating, didn't Descartes created more problem essentially?
Of course, of course. If you want to solve a problem, you have to create, first and foremost, more problems that are necessary.
Yes, sure.
And
Like he
then
made it also easy to investigate, but also to create more problem.
more problems, no, more problems within philosophy, within science, within every sort of way of thought. I think it's better to have more problems such that if you come up with a certain sort of methods, you can curtail and constrain certain sort of problems to core foundational problems. And that's exactly what Descartes does. Yeah, first you have to proliferate the problems. Yeah, you have to create a first problematic fallout and then bring it back to a very microscopic, tiny sets of problems that you perhaps think might be fundamental to the issue at hand. Of course, that's a method. If you can't proliferate the problems, and if you think that the only problem at hand is the one that you just saw, you're most probably falling for the phantasm, the delusion of mind, a la Plato.
Mhm. Yeah, that's totally.
Okay, my dear friends, our time is running out. I love you all. I will see you next week. And yeah, all good.
Thank you so much, Reza, and to
Ciao.
everyone.
And love
It
Thank
to
you
was
all
very
of
great.
you.
Thank you.
Love to all of you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
I know that I said, okay, no questions asked, but I'm kind of, my mouth is dry. Before I move on, maybe you should ask two questions, three questions actually. Who wants to ask? The first sacrificial victim. Abdul Rahman,
Yes. Particularly, how can we implement this by, as you said, it's not radical enough. Taking what's there, but removing the West out of it. Not dismissing it on the whole premise, but taking what's of value and removing it. How can we do that without, with the current, let's say, stigmatism of it?
I think by restoring, but you are asking me to essentially spoil the entire seminar here. By restoring point by point uh, what has caused Western Enlightenment or Enlightenment project, to be stigmatized to begin with, right? One would be essentially its fundamental, Dawkinian, Richard Dawkins' idea that, well, enlightenment has nothing to do with religion, or modernity does not have anything to do with religion, right? To be modern means that to be non-religious, secular, completely, if not atheist, right? So there are different sort of points, but yes, there would be a procedure to reinvent al-Khwarizmi, to restore the relays that have been destroyed, and made enlightenment to be stigmatized in such fashion. But of course, I will talk about this as we move forward throughout the sessions.
Yeah.
Mm,
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
How, because there are a lot of us, let's say, in the Middle East or the southern nations, but I wouldn't say the global south, but a lot of the southern nations have this victim mentality and the self-defeatism when it comes to a lot of things. Oh, they're better than us because they're always planning for us. How do you even try to begin even to change that, to
Well, that
accept?
is unfortunately our task to do with our own people, right? And you see the same thing in Iran. So basically, don't want to get so political here. Uh, yes, there is absolutely a kind of a self-inferiority problem. But then this is why you have to read your own history, right? The sheer amount of contributions that has come from the Middle East, particularly. I don't want to glorify the Middle East for all of its problems. It's just astonishing. I mean, there is no, for example, recently I watched YouTube of this lecture by Per Martin Loef. Per Martin Loef is one of the most astonishing computer scientists and logicians. He's also credited for, through his invention of type theory, um, founded, univalent foundations of mathematics, homotopy type theory. And there is this lecture which basically says, well, I think that some people ask him about the word judgment in philosophy, in Western philosophy. He said, well, he goes on and on about this, that there is no word judgment in any sort of Western or even Greek canons. There is literally no word judgment. It comes from the word hukm, right? It's precisely because Arabs, when they translated Aristotle, because Aristotle is infamously, in certain sort of important points, extremely talking in scarce words. So Arabs had to reinterpret. And then, of course, the reinterpretation is also a radical translation, where basically uh, they came with the idea of judgment, which becomes most profound idea both in philosophy and in logic. Yes, so rediscovery of our own history would be nice as a stepping stone for addressing this self-inferiority.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Mika.
Yes, I was just wondering if you're saying that this discipline created by Descartes is stayed true to or abstracted in the current things that we see so much with AI, or are we going in different routes through
We are
these?
going to go to a completely different route.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah. It seems like it's been taken over, and it's just been shifted into like interests and more human drives and these sorts of things. rather
Absolutely.
um, rather than like a pure practice, like Descartes might. Or if you're saying that Descartes is a pure practice, I don't know.
Probably so. I mean, both, both. Again, without spoiling the end game, I think that there is something quite specific about even with these parochial AI that we have.
Yeah,
Which is, I think, quite interesting, quite dangerous. Yes, it has certain sort of principles, even not from Descartes, but also al-Khwarizmi's, actually.
yeah,
But we can do something better with those old principles than just
yeah,
this sort of shit AI.
yeah. I guess I want to skip to number three to hear what you have to say. So, but yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that's my only question.
Love you. Thank you so much. My apologies. I have my eyesight has become even worse. Paul. So anyone who has in order, they can talk. I can't see fonts anymore.
So like I recorded here and maybe like coming back to the first comment in regards to this kind of geographic insecurity.
Yes.
There was this like lack of belonging from metaphysics, let's say from certain territoriality. And I wonder what is the space or the place of metaphysics in this Enlightenment project. And also what, I don't know, what are the controversies or the beyond thoughts in regards to metaphysical shutdown and how
Yes, 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 yeah. No, I get it. Well, I mean, of course, I will talk about this as we move forward. This is a giant question, and I think that you should also bring this question again to me on the third session, so I
okay.
can give you a better one. But for now, I can give you one simple snapshot of what you are talking about. So, as I mentioned, all the seminar was built upon that text that I presented at Delft. And it was supposed to be Ray Brazier, me, and Catarina Dutil-Novaes. She's a Brazilian, logician and philosopher of science. And there was this Lebanese guy who asked me that, well, Reza, what do you think about metaphysics? I said, well, first maybe Katarina should take that question, right? I must say I was extremely unimpressed by the answer. And that it showed me that there is absolutely, when you say that the question of insecurity here also can apply to the idea of metaphysics. Precisely because there was not a full history, a deep history of metaphysical thought in parts of Latin America. Um, philosophers started to move towards, in fact, anti-metaphysical stances, right? And Katarina said, well, I don't believe in metaphysics. For me, the world is just a soup. I mean, that's just like the most unimpressive answer I've ever heard from a scholar that I really appreciate. No, I said that, well, any person who says that, I don't believe in metaphysics has some sort of subterfuge, camouflage metaphysical presuppositions. Hegel understood this very correctly, that we can't just say that I don't like metaphysics, like Carnap, or that all metaphysical problems are pseudo problems, right? No. In fact, we can show that within every sort of this image of purity from metaphysical problems lie extremely sinister metaphysical presuppositions.
Okay, I'm gonna wait for the third session.
Sure. When I actually talk about this, in fact, this session also I talk a little bit about this problem.
I mean, like, I think strongly relates to like what the system of beliefs are and how in encounter with like Western philosophy.
Yes.
Like a
Yes.
like
Yeah.
how to say, like an event of like this metaphysical shutdown of this belief system, and also how then it relates as well to the practice that we are doing here when we engage with philosophy and maybe
One of the reasons, though, Paula, one of the reasons that metaphysics has been so killed effectively is precisely because religion has been, excised from the project of enlightenment, right?
yeah, I mean, like, I also with my affirmation, I try also to pose a system of beliefs that is not like ideologized, meaning like it's on not only belonging to like a specific religious belief, let's say, but just to maybe cultural beliefs, or like just to very like material, pragmatical forms of beliefs.
Sure, but even I would say that I don't think that we are, of course, I'm going to talk about this. I don't think that we should talk about religion always in terms of ideology. This I have been talked in past seminars. What we call universal religions are not merely ideologies. They are essentially sets of techniques, practices, community building, material practices, affects, so on and so forth. Yes, so when you completely get rid of religion, you are also kind of get rid of what you might call to be some of these techniques, which are absolutely necessary. Yeah.
I mean,
For
like, I also come from like assumption in the, let's say, art practice as well. So like,
uh-huh.
I think also in a system of like labor and like work, and how like let's say this practice is so linked to this immaterial beliefs and system of
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
So that's
Yeah.
what I wanted to appeal, is still like a system of values and beliefs, maybe that we cannot so concretely name, but that also experience this sense of like detachment from, in a, let's say, like idealized way of some sort of like enlightenment project. I I am very curious about the third seminar because I just have this kind of controversy inside these topics that I am very curious about, and that is.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, there is a tendency within the Enlightenment that, you know, Enlightenment is not, it's not about this, I would say from a philosophical perspective, it's not about that, well, insofar as you cannot label a practice or a technique of mind and body, uh, this doesn't exist, or it's just like some sort of pseudo praxis or superstition or something like that. I think what enlightenment always asks is that can we think more about what we are doing when we are thinking, and can we think more about, or explicate more our thoughts? Uh, it is essentially what you might call to be really the very edge of that spear into a dark ascent into the dark. Yeah. This is what enlightenment already is. It is kind of driven by a process of self-discovery that lands you to become alien to begin with, right?
Can I
In a
say
very
something about
yes,
this?
absolutely, Eva. My apologies,
Okay.
Evin. Sorry.
Yeah. Is enlightenment really that, or it's just like filtering a bunch of ideas and like making some things more explicit, or like opening some ways for like Western men, let's say, to be refined in a way? Because like when you like reload or reduce enlightenment to the core values, it's always like logicianism, it feels like the core values are like separated, actually cut out like brutally from religion. But religion was like not a religion at all. It was like a bunch of stuff, like pagan stuff, like Celtic stuff, and um, like Mesopotamian stuff, and bunch of stuff already established come together to just to be, not just to be. I'm not like making it like giving no shade or something, but like it's filtered down for some people to talk it like almost like 1,000 years ago, or like build something up easily. I feel like enlightenment is about like communicating easily because people were already doing good before enlightenment. Like I feel like when I will say patriarchy directly, like when patriarchy is like filtering down stuff, it always comes with this going to the core of like something and making it like, let's say, sellable. Like maybe it's not the right word, but like it's like when the law is like law, right? Law. No, it's like, orders and law and stuff. So like it requires to be violence to be filtered. Like it allows you to do some stuff, let's say Western law according to Roman law, and Roman comes after Greek and Mesopotamian mixture. Like
No, I know. Yes.
what are Western
I don't think that
enlightenment in that
enlightenment,
sense?
yeah, no, I think that you're right, but I don't think that enlightenment is all about, easy communication. I think that enlightenment, I mean, that Newton was an occultist. Do you know that?
Yeah, but he didn't achieve anything. He tried for his whole life.
Well, he,
Like
well,
humans were
he
already doing.
discovered
Who
gravity.
got killed in the witch trials? Sorry, they were already doing the thing he tried to do. Like they were healing people. They were like doing
Giordano Bruno.
transcendental. I don't know who he is, but yeah, sure.
You know, it's quite strange that many of the progenitors of the Enlightenment were into some sort of weird practices, which I like.
But they didn't quite nailed it, because like if they did,
They
why are we
didn't. They
naming it?
didn't. They didn't. They didn't. But hopefully a new enlightenment can do that. It's a little bit sci-fi though. Yes, you're completely correct, but that's part of the genealogy, I would say, critical genealogy of the Enlightenment, in a sense that I would say that Descartes and Spinoza absolutely can be absolved from the accusation of logicism, or they just wanted to make communication easy. Precisely because they invented fundamental ideas through which, in fact, we can discover new domains of
But did they?
practices with nature.
I don't think
Practices
so.
with
I mean,
nature.
like people were already, they weren't writing, but like I read your session one readings, and like some of them, and there was a very interesting subject there. This Italian woman in the Enlightenment, I shouldn't recall her name right now, But she was like writing against this male power of like they were like putting women into like non-human status, and it was actually not new. Like it was going since like Greek, ancient Greek, actually.
I see.
Yeah, but like,
Uh,
yeah. I mean, sorry, yeah.
no,
But like,
no. I will, definitely,
yeah.
I will try to answer these. Some of these I don't think that I can personally answer. But by the way, I think that we wanted to have two or three questions. If Nia and Zachary, Neve and Zachary, just wait, and then we go the rest of the lecture. So my apologies, because we are really we need to go through this. Then the next section would be